I'm going to go ahead and call this regular Assembly Committee on Homelessness to order. I'll go ahead and start with introductions, starting with Ms. LaFrance.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera.
John Weddleton.
Tim Steele.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
And we did have Miss Burke, but I think she will be back in the room. If we can go ahead, just go around and get introductions from folks in the audience. We can start here.
Carissa.
Amy Stromer.
Oh, Woody Clark. Tom Craft.
Rob Couples Cottages and Vacation Rentals, 3rd and Highland.
Lisa Sauer, Bees Cafe. Sage Cohen, I live in Fairview.
Mary Kelly, Alaska Public Justice Center. Let's Wilson with the Division of Behavioral Health.
Susan Musante, Division of Behavioral Health.
Patrick Anderson, Rural Cap.
Salvation Army.
Salvation Army. Aaron Johnson, Salvation Army.
Mike Courtney, Alaska Public. Dave Siren, Falcon Government.
Barry Andrews, Rural Cap. I'm Joshua Springs, Senator Tom Beggage.
Okay, we will go ahead and move forward to... Oh, okay, sure, go ahead.
Eric Glass, ACLU, Alaska.
Ray Jackson, South Central Foundation.
Ron Oliva, Rub Steak Auction, resident, taxpayer. Good guy.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva. All right. So then we will move on to our regular business items, starting with the Mayor's Housing and Homeless Services Coordination Update. Ms. Burke.
Having just a moment of technical issues. Can't hear you.
Do you have an agenda?
We do, yeah. It's front page right there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to be back. Our team actually had the opportunity last week to visit the National Housing First Conference. We had representatives from the fire department, the police department, our mental health partners. There were a number of nonprofits from the community who attended, Catholic Social Services, Rural Cap. We had a very nice group of people listening to national updates and work to address homelessness in communities. And I, again, was pleased to realize that we are ahead of the curve. We have so much participation in our community and support from everything from policy down to service level support, and it's really nice to reflect on that from that perspective. I also had an opportunity to meet with the Denver, their version of our Pay for Success program, which has been working on a project for 250 people to become housed through a social impact bond or a performance-based contracting negotiation. And making those connections will help our community, help me in continuing to move forward on our Pay for Success project. On that note, I would like to announce that that project, the Pay for Success program, has completed our first phase. There are 4 phases in that project, the first being feasibility. And we've wrapped this while we're reviewing the report on the Pay for Success feasibility analysis. We will be announcing that for the community on May 1st at 9:30 in the morning at the Mountain View Community Library in that nice open meeting space that they have at the library. We would invite the community to come and be a part of that announcement and to hear the outcome from that Pay for Success program. So lots of exciting things moving forward. I'm pleased to have the team that we have. There was no team in the presence at the conference who had the representatives from police, fire, mental health, social services. We really are taking a comprehensive view, and it's something for us all to be very proud of. I wanted to also address the mobile intervention team is being stood up now. We have 2 positions that are making their way through the municipality. They'll be located in the fire department to assist us in testing and developing this concept of having a mobile response that can assist with crisis or high volume need in the community. And so we're very pleased that Assistant Chief Boyd has been helping us stand that up and working with our team, with Melina Breland and Tanya Vandenbos in becoming housed at our fire department. Tanya, if you will recall, has been tasked over to the Community Action Police Department, Community Action team in the police department, and she will remain tasked there, although she will be housed through our pilot with the fire department.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. If I could just pause you really quick, just want to put in the record that Mr. Trainee and Mr. Dyson are in attendance. You may continue.
We will be ending the emergency cold weather shelter period next week. April 30 is usually the period of time where we are able to provide the additional resources for overflow shelter, which brings us into our summer season of working on camp notifications, working on referrals for individuals to get to housing, and coordinating those services tighter for the community. So the mobile intervention team will be a component of that. We've also begun conversations with our coordinated entry. If you recall, that's the by name list that's operated by the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. Coordinated entry will be assisting, we'll be working with outreach workers to enroll people on the by name list to ensure that we're tracking the need across the community. We know we have more need than we have available resources right now, but we are looking towards some new opportunities for housing and some new resources coming online. If you have not heard of it, there is a press release in your packet today announcing a partnership that's a very exciting opportunity in the community for a new housing resources coming online for people. So that whole process, I'll say it again, I like to say it every time we meet, that this is a system. We're working on identifying people who are camping, we're getting them on the coordinated entry list or to resources where we can get referrals into housing. We're developing relationships with those individuals. Sometimes this takes a long time, and we're moving this whole system. It's really focused on the end goal of housing people, so that we're not, so that we are reducing the number of campers in the community, and we're making progress. Those are the verbal updates. I have a presentation that contains a few more updates on community progress and the point in time numbers. And then the last 2 items in the presentation today round out some emphasis on particular subpopulation areas. Mr. Davidge is here to talk about the ending veteran homelessness proposal. And then we have the opportunity to hear out from Catholic Social Services on the medical respite program that's been in operation now for a year down at the shelter.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Just want to put in the record that Mr. Croft and Ms. Rose are in attendance. Thank you.
And a topic of discussion for us in recent meetings has been around the Anchorage Community Plan, the 2-year action plan to address homelessness in the community. We've been working very closely with the Coalition to End Homelessness and with the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority around a couple of events that have really generated some more energy for us, and we'll be capitalizing on that going forward. The Coalition and the Mayor's Office have been in discussion about ways that we can better align and how we can, in fact, share out the support for the Coalition to take the lead in bringing the action plan forward and helping us move to get a data dashboard. And is this there have been some discussions around a vacancy, that there's a vacancy in the executive director of the Homeless Coalition right now. Lisa is the chair of the coalition, and between Lisa, Marcy Shearer from Cook Inlet Housing, and myself, we've been having coordination meetings around aligning the work that the mayor's office has been doing with the coalition and ensuring that as we move forward into the next 3 years of this administration, that we are shoring up the community resources to continue the momentum that we have. So the first step that we're going to do, in recognition that we really are overdue in getting the data dashboard and the summary of our prioritization, is to develop a contract with AgriVec to facilitate that process and really building the momentum from the gathering group that happened on February 23rd that included many more stakeholders in the community. We'll have the first meeting for that. I'm sorry that the screen is not centering correctly on my screen. This is user error right here. We'll have our first meeting at for that on May 11th. Hawaii might help some of us. Our first meeting will be May 11th. We'll have some additional stakeholder meetings and input. We'll have a final meeting on June 25th, and by July 1, we will have this document ready to go. It will serve as a blueprint. I know that the assembly members have been asking for this, the coalition has been asking for this, and it's a really great opportunity for us to just maintain momentum and keep moving. We'll begin with our point in time information, and
actually, Ms. Burke, I do have a question. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. The coalition, is it now responsible for making recommendations for HUD funding to the Assembly?
The coalition is the continuum of care, and so there are HUD, we don't receive all HUD funds that come into the community, but there are some HUD funds that come in through the coalition. We don't make a recommendation to the Assembly. We are a grantor, and we have an application process and we currently have funds.
So, just a quick follow-up then. Previously, the HAN Commission was responsible for making recommendations to the Assembly for HUD priorities for the community. Has that shifted then, or is that still, Nancy, that might be your question too, I don't know.
Yeah,
the HAN Commission has been the HAN Commission has been, I think, undergoing some changes on the seats, and if you recall, there was a homeless subcommittee that was overseeing the community plan and was responsible in some ways for guiding that. And recently, there was a combining of that Homeless Oversight Committee and the HAN Commission, so now it has two H's at the beginning, the HAN. However, the HAN Commission really is responsible for producing a report for the Assembly annually, although I don't think we've seen that, and that's one of the areas I think we can reemphasize for the HAN Commission, that collaboration with the coalition is key. That collaboration has happened through a few members, John Spurbeck, Kenny Peterson, some people who had dual roles on the coalition and the HAN Commission. But I think if we don't formalize it soon, we're going to lose that connection, and that's an area for us to focus on.
Thanks, yeah. Because the concern that I heard from some members of the community was that a lot of the decisions now for funding recommendations are coming from the Homeless Coalition, and I don't know if this is true or not. And what that means is then that there's less public process, less open meeting accountability for how those recommendations are made. And not that people really attend the HAN Commission anyways, other than those that have to be there.
And I would say that the Homeless Coalition meetings are open to the public, and we have a broad membership. So I hope that nobody feels that they can come to the Homeless Coalition meetings. You are welcome to come to the Homeless Coalition.
And the difference, of course, being that those meetings would be available by recording, or the minutes would be available to the public via our our tools. And so anyhow, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, Ms. Burke.
Okay, Sharon has fixed me. So we'll begin with the outreach data, and we'll begin with the point-in-time data. And one of the reasons I wanted to emphasize that the outreach data is important to us is that that gives us an indicator of the resources needed to help the entire community. When we don't have enough shelter beds, when we don't have enough housing placements for people, we get camping and we get some of the issues that are problematic for a broad number of citizens. So we begin with that outreach data. We've put a lot of effort in the last 3 years into ensuring that the methodology is improved. While it's been changing, I think we can most assuredly promise you that this is the best number, this is the best count, this is the best process we've had in our history in Anchorage. I feel much more confident today saying that we have a good count of how many people are homeless in our community on that snapshot count, and now we'll move forward and make sure that we're tracking the other data points that give that give more credence to that number.
Sure. Mr. Trainee.
Ma'am, have you figured out how to take out of that factor those that camp by choice? They're not homeless. That's the lifestyle they've adopted. Have we figured out how to factor those in and to remove them from the total homeless? Because you've got a number out there, these men are homeless. But some of those are homeless by choice, not of economic conditions. They like camping.
Yeah, this was addressed a lot at that conference I was just attending, and even within that lump of people, if you will, that grouping, the people who are choosing to be out, there are a fair number of those people who, if you really get to know them, they've been limited by some of their life choices and sometimes their disabling conditions to a very narrow set of choices, and being outdoors is the best of all of those. There are some people who really can't tolerate a high volume of people in one location, and so thinking of going to a shelter that has 100 or 240 other people in it is a challenge. So when you parse out the people who are camping by choice, I think that the number of those people we see coming through Anchorage in the summer is greater than those people who would really be choosing to be outdoors in the winter. That's something for us to move into as we go into this summer. Interviewing people better, I think we can do some more data collection to find out what other choices we might offer them than trying to camp in our community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
So, as you know, we've been using the outreach data to help us understand the base need of capacity for services. An emergency cold weather and winter is something that has been a focus of ours and will remain a focus of ours. It's a critical health and safety matter that we try to get enough overflow spaces for people or housing options so we're not having deaths due to exposure in the community. So the point-in-time numbers are released. These are the summary level numbers. You notice on the far right here, our numbers, these are the new 2018 numbers. It's a total of 1,094 individuals in the community who were homeless on January 23rd, 2018. 715 of them were single adults in the community. 92 were youth between the age of 18 to 24, and 280 individuals and families. So as you can see, our numbers are holding steady with potentially some movement in the right direction on the adult homeless number, which is our biggest point in the community.
All right, I have a few questions for you, Ms. Burke. We'll start with Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking through the rest of this presentation. I think you're going to address. I'll just say really briefly, looking at this. I think you're right that you can see a little bit of a trend downward, but I think, would you agree that this could also be sort of either statistical noise or changing in methodology as we came from 2013 to 2018? It's really difficult to conclude anything from these numbers, is that right?
I I believe that's correct. The point at which we started moving toward the data collection coming from a more robust HMIS system, and I would like to remind the committee that the HMIS system was used by many fewer users, and now that list has been expanded, so it is more robust data. So as we move more toward HMIS capturing our data and a methodology for outreach, I can be more confident. So I'm paying more attention to the 2016 to 2018 trend than perhaps before that.
I have one brief follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Just another comment on that. I think there's also sort of a counterfactual you have to run. So the 2015, 2016 is when Anchorage, Alaska entered a pretty severe recession that we're still feeling. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, had our efforts not gone into place, you might have seen a much higher number, although it's really, really difficult to know that, right? So anyway.
To the extent that we might trust how this data trend was going, if you look at the adults, the blue line, there was a trajectory up, and we've seen it curve now, and perhaps optimistically see it moving downward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been finding housing for individuals here for a couple of years now, and I'm wondering, have you been tracking some of those people that we got off the street that first year or so? How many of them are still staying housed, and how many have gone back out on the street?
I can certainly dig into the particulars of that number, but if you'll recall last month when Laura Cox-Wilson was here, she was reporting that there is a percentage of return to homelessness for those people. We targeted people who were at the high end of the scale, and we will be focusing on what's happening for those individuals. But it was within the margin of return to homelessness for others. So I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that people are falling out of homelessness, but we do need to focus on those numbers. And some of the complexities of that will be incorporated in this contract and this data dashboard that we'll be bringing forward. So we would like to dig into those numbers. I would also just like to report that at the National Convention, one of the outtakes that communities are saying that homelessness was somewhat holding static. The rates of homelessness were not increasing across the country, but there was movement within that of people who were chronically homeless or more long-time homeless. And they saw an increase of 13% nationally. I don't believe we're seeing that because of the focus that we've had on focusing on those high needs individuals. But I have that directly in my mind to bring out in that data dashboard for us to compare ourselves to national trends.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Weddleton.
Could you define homeless?
Okay, yeah, so that's a great question. There are levels of homelessness. Literally homeless would be a person that we're encountering in the community or, at a shelter or in a dwelling that's not made for habitation. Within that grouping, there are people who've been in homelessness longer, and there's that class of what we would describe as chronically homeless individuals, which are people who've had multiple episodes of homelessness for more than 1 year. There are also diversion programs that focus on people who are at risk of homelessness, and that's another topic for discussion that we want to also be looking at that.
Oh.
Sure.
So if someone's couch surfing, are they homeless? They would be on this list potentially?
They would not.
They would not. So they don't really have a home, but they have a roof over their heads. So they don't. Okay.
But I'll just say that for people who are couch surfing, especially in particular families for couch surfing, we can take them in at shelter, and we do.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Since you talked about kind of concluding the cold weather shelter season, are you going to have a report on estimated deaths out of shelter for us coming up?
Yeah, I'd like to look. It gets a little confusing. I'd like to look at exposure deaths. Tracking that is a little more complicated.
Of course. Thank you.
But about that, I just that on behalf of the coalition, I've had the same interest, and I've been in discussion with the state and some of their
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you.
this might not be an appropriate time to answer this question. In theory, I really appreciate getting the private sector involved and so on. You got to watch out that there aren't perverse incentives, you know, and so. And by the way, I know a couple of people for getting housing has been a game changer for them, and I'm convinced that it's a great thing to do. But here's the issue: you got a whole 2 or 3 level of place. You got subsidized housing, people out of the homeless community, lots of drug deals going down. So, the traffic at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning goes really up. So. Tenant is, quote, trying to stay straight, calls the cops, and they say it's a landlord issue. You know, the landlord, he lives across town, you know, and he doesn't want to get up in the night, and so on and so forth. You can imagine all that is. And there's probably an incentive for the owner of the building to keep it full. Mm-hmm. You know, so it would be delightful if we could figure out an incentive where the landlord makes money for every dealer that goes to jail, and, you know, and so on. And I know from property crimes, having surveillance cameras, and the cops are pretty good if you give them pictures of license plates, you know, and folks who may be in lower levels of the retail business, they'll follow up on those guys. But so there's an issue that have you thought about, or
we think quite a bit about that, and I was just scanning the room to see if anybody from my CAP partners are here. But that's really a place I think we're also ahead of the curve in that we are coordinating with the police, who are usually called when something goes wrong or, you know, when a person is in crisis. And so we're able to, I wouldn't say we're able to stay on top of every situation. It's a pretty big city, but when things float up, they begin to come to the attention of the police. And we've been able to use that as a resource for helping people who are vulnerable in a situation that wasn't good for them. So it really is a topic that we pay attention to.
Yeah, so my suggestion that with a landlord, if you hold him harmless, if he gets somebody to go to jail, you know, that he not lose money as a result of doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned that to Lieutenant Person.
Yeah, and then the surveillance cameras, you know, to catch the purveyors.
Sure.
Yeah, it can't be a bad idea. But yeah, and I've been paying a lot of attention to West Coast, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and LA areas, and I think you're right that we're probably doing pretty good. But it'd be interesting, maybe at your national conventions, have figured out some other jurisdictions how to, you know, help the landlords and plus the bad guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Trainee, quick question.
Ma'am, quick question for you on the youth. You have the youth defined as 18 to 24. Do you work with the school district to figure out that? Because I know the school district says how many homeless they've got in their schools. Have you figured out how to work with them to get a good number for us?
You'll notice if you add these columns that they don't quite add up, and there's about 6 or 7 that are not represented here. And those would be the people under age 18 that are identified as homeless through the school district's program.
So do you use those numbers from them in this factor you put in?
It's in the deeper report that's there. I didn't include it in this report because it's less of a...
How many kids were we talking about, do you know?
It was 7. I mean, it wasn't a large
7?
number. Yeah, and there's another slide that I'd be happy to send around to you that the school district provided to the meeting we had in February that showed that those numbers are going down.
Okay,
And
would you
I
also
said-
find out what they define as homeless from their perspective? Because I know I had some grandkids that moved into my house because their parents were buying a new house, so they were listed as homeless even though they're my grandchildren. Of course, they're living with their grandparents.
Oh, interesting.
But the school district considered them homeless.
Oh, I see.
So I'd like to figure out if the school district can get you information that's really accurate.
I would be happy to put them on a future agenda, maybe next month or the month after.
If you would, Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. All right, Ms. Burke.
Okay. So just as these are things we've talked through. I think that this is a nice graphic of the coordinated entry system. This is a complex system. There's a lot of movement in and out. The list, the by name list of people who are homeless changes throughout the month. New entries, new exits. But what's great about this list is we're starting to get the percentage of people over time. We're able to really make some decent categories for the percentage of people who are high needs, medium, and low. And what that helps us do is understand the resources we will need to help people move from homelessness. Understanding that the list is fluid, but the characteristics of people coming in really still do continue to look like this bell curve. And so we can then begin placing costs with what we know resources will be needed to assist in moving people from homelessness. We'll be able to get that very clean. How many people do we have? How much will it cost to move them forward? And how do we measure success at the end? So that's some of the work we're beginning to be able to dig into with this contract that we'll have. This is just an example from November of 2017. This is the makeup of the coordinated entry list. As you can see, the adults are the largest, but those percentages roughly break out to 8% in the low needs group, 60% in the mid-range, and 32% at the high end. So it's just a tool we're beginning to be able to use because this data is coming from our HMIS system and coordinated entry. This is just the example of the families and the youth from that same snapshot in November, and the percentages you see break out similarly as well. Then what we will do, the rest of the framework that we will do is we'll begin to monitor how long will people spend homelessness in the community, what's the length of time between when they entered the system and when they are housed, and then the question that was asked earlier about what about people returning to the system, what's happening to those people, how do we prevent that, and we'll be able to move forward. The reason we're able to set up these systems and the reason that the nation is moving so quickly through solving this is that the Department of Defense really went first. And this graph is a depiction of what happens when a system is fully funded. The HUD-VASH, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say that everything is fully funded, but this is the most robust system that we've seen. And you see this nice trend in the graph as resources go up, the homelessness rates go down. This is for the state of Alaska. This was 2008 through 2017, the veterans that have been assisted through that HUD-VASH program. And I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. So just as a reminder, all of these projects, we can map these projects, the Pay for Success demonstration project, the Youth Homelessness demonstration project, we can begin mapping them toward those high, medium, and low ranges of need in the community. That will help us to understand if we have enough at each level. There is a gap. If you look back on the bell curve, the place where we have the most need is really the place where we have the fewest amount of federal resources coming in. And so the program being announced later today is a project that fits very nicely in this niche. It addresses people who we can move quickly out of the system, and we'll have more resource to focus on people with higher levels of need. So all to say that I'm really pleased we are where we are. It was nice to have some reflection and to be renewed on the fact that we're on a great path and we have great partners. And so putting this data together will be the focus of our next 2 months.
All right, I have a couple of questions. Mr. Constant.
Just on your graphic of the VI SPDAT distribution, do you have updated info, or is it really static? Because that said 1/5/17.
Yeah, I didn't have an opportunity to have that run for us, but it really has held when we look at it. I do have the coordinated entry report from March, and those percentages really is holding. I will rerun that for you though.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Constant. Sure, I'll add you to the list. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to encourage you in your communications to watch out for acronyms. I can guess what 6 SPDAT means, or HUD-VASH means, but you're probably aiming at a lot brighter audience than me.
No,
But I struggle with those things. So if you could define them when you use them, it'd be valuable, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson, for that reminder. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you mind addressing again what counts as moderate level of need and which demographic, if it breaks out by demographic, is typically falling under that?
It does. That's the vulnerability index, services prioritization data assessment tool. The assessment we use, called the acronym VSPDAT, really looks at 3 major areas that are vulnerabilities for persons who are homeless and that we know increase over time of being homeless. So struggles with mental health, addictions, and medical problems. So the range of the assessment runs from 0, which would be someone who's really economically homeless and doesn't struggle with any of those 3 areas, to someone who may have a lifelong disability or mental illness or both. So 0 to 17 is the range for the chart. And when you look at the, there's some lines that are in this, this bell curve. Really someone who's 4 and below on that assessment screening, providing that they gave accurate information. This is a struggle for any tool that you use in any system. Self-report is historically unreliable. If you have the right information and they are 4 below, there's really no intervention that's recommended. Those are people who just need a safe, warm place to be. They have social contacts. They'll make their way back out of homelessness very quickly. People who are between 4 and 8 or 9 really require some level of support. And the range of support can be really anywhere from up to 6 months, maybe even up to 2 years. So in this category, priorities would be around service assistance, like a case management model for them to understand options and to access resources. They may need some time-limited assistance with mental health treatment, substance use treatment. This is where the rebuilding of our substance use treatment capacity in the community falls. That's why it's a focus of ours. Or some medical care. And so that mid-range folks needs some level of time-limited assistance, and then they'll be back on their way.
All right, thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
Okay, so the last section I just wanted to cover leading into the conversation. We've talked a tremendous amount in this committee about measuring key outcomes in the system. The adult homeless system has been the focus of a great amount of my work because that's our greatest need, or one of our greatest needs in the community. There is a lot of need in families and unaccompanied youth and young people. But the adult system is right now overburdened. And so looking at the length of time spent homeless and the length of time between becoming homeless and getting housed, we know that those needs on the assessment increase. We know that people generally do better when they're housed more quickly. And so this brings us to looking at the numbers and sort of monitoring that trend of adults that we count in our snapshot count. And I did adjust this slide because there was some confusing language around the term for temporary housing. And really under HUD there is no, the category that HUD is requiring communities to count as temporary or transitional settings along with emergency shelter. Those two are time limited, they're not permanent resources for people, and so they are together in one area of the count and then unsheltered. So as we look at this trend, as I was saying, from 2016 to 2018, we're seeing it move in the right direction, and as we pointed out, we've also entered some more economic challenging times, so I do believe that this trend is trending down. I also believe that the data will have a pretty generous margin of error, but that we are heading in the right direction. This information really helps us when we are looking for resources. We can begin to get people those needed tools for mental health care, medical care, and substance use issues. And the changes we've been making, we talked a lot about some of the public safety and the security needs of the campus, but as I've said before, if we can address the things that are challenging for individuals in the homeless service system, we will begin to have less of a need for security and monitoring on at the main shelter location, Brother Francis and Beans Cafe. So I think this fits very well that we're going to talk about, we're going to ask Lisa in a few minutes if she'll review the medical care that's gone into the shelter. It's not something that we've focused enough on, that we're getting people, we're getting medical needs met at the shelter now, and that's assisting in the work that we've been doing with our mobile intervention teamwork. All of these resources we've placed on the campus have led us to the results that we all want to see, and that's this nice trend line of our emergency call data moving in our direction down. We want to see this get to another place. We need to keep moving on this. But the fixes that we are doing are the right fixes, and we are, I believe we're moving at a good pace in making changes, permanent changes that will benefit the people in our downtown areas. Having said that, at the end of emergency cold weather, we have the opportunity to look at the number of shelter resources and to begin planning. It's not too early for us to begin planning for October, and to begin thinking about the number of spaces that we need for people who are presenting as homeless in the community. So even though we know that average changes, if we average the adults who were in shelter from 2011 to 2018, that number is about 605. We know that we have a regular number of shelter resources of about 450 in the community. We bumped that number up when we add in the Beans. We had a lease of the building at Beans Cafe this year, and the Downtown Hope Center has been a tremendous partner for us. So we bumped that number up to 580. That means that we are getting closer to right sizing this system, although I believe we would like to focus the resources we're spending on overflow shelter right now on housing individuals and not have to have that extra layer of protection. But we have a range of between 25 to 155 people that are unaccounted when we run these straight numbers. So this is further verification that we have work to do. We need to make sure we're accounting for a safe place for people over the winter. We've definitely seen a reduction in outdoor deaths. If any of you recall prior years when we weren't managing this, there were a number of outdoor deaths. But we're also moving in the right direction for this system. But I think this is a great reminder of how overburdened the Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe locations are. We're frustrated with the number of calls that happen to that campus, but it really is a simple fact that we're overburdened. We're focusing on the fixes. We're heading in the right direction, but these are our numbers.
So I have a couple of questions, Ms. Burke. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Two, really. The first one back on your graphic that shows the reduction in police and fire calls. How do we interpret that? What are those numbers in the little circles? Is that monthly, weekly?
That's a week. That's a
Okay, so
weekly.
those are weekly calls. Okay. Thank you. And then, just to make a point, looking at your chart, emergency cold weather shelter, just adding all the numbers out, subtracting the 100 that aren't in the downtown. The overburden isn't just at the Beans and Brother Francis, but it's in the whole downtown district. And that, for me, was best typified this week when I received an email that I did not forward to you of another individual who has lots of human poop surrounding their car with handprints on the car after having been broken into and needles on the ground, and that's all the way over at 10th Avenue. And so thank you for pointing out that that area is overburdened, and this just goes again to demonstrate concretely that 83% of all of these beds are within one geographic area.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Rose.
I just had a question about the graphic for the APD and the Anchorage Fire Department calls. It says 2018. What can we get as far as data for the previous years to compare when we started using the interventions from the medical facility on campus and the other interventions, the mobile intervention team? What kind of data can you show to show how that has progressed from 2017 and previously?
We had that, I believe we had that comparison at the last committee meeting, but Lisa tells me that she actually has that in her.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And then to follow up with that, you also said we're preparing for the emergency cold weather shelters for the coming year. And I think I mentioned this before, and I think you'll remember, in I think October, I mentioned the transportation that we need to get people to cold weather shelters from Brother Francis or from Beans, from the shelters at 8 o'clock when the shelters are at max capacity, and how we can go forward in this plan to include some sort of transportation to the cold weather shelters for that plan.
So the cold weather shelter locations for the adult system, there's two systems that function, and we've talked before, and it will be worth again highlighting that the family cold weather shelter system uses a dispersed model with churches. So when someone shows up at a family shelter, there is a church that's open that evening, and there's a series of cab vouchers, and if the family's not driving, there's transportation that is incorporated in that system. In the adult system, the overflow spaces have been traditionally kept close to the shelter, so because the people can get to that easily. That's the point that Assembly Member Constant's making, that they're all kind of in one area.
Okay.
If we move to a dispersed model for overflow shelter, we would certainly have to incorporate the transportation. Although I will say that the Downtown Hope Center uses a van to pick up women and
Right.
drive them to that location.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. But at the cost of the Hope Center and other private organizations.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Rose. Mr. Trainee.
Nancy, do we have a program for people who only need assistance in getting utility deposits? There are a lot of people out there, they're making it, but barely. But they can't get it being homeless because there's huge cost for utilities. What's that program called, and how much money are we putting towards it?
That gets into a little bit closer to the diversion or early intervention part of the system, and there's a state grant through Alaska Housing Finance Corporation that's the Basic Homeless Assistance Program. We also use some of the federal resources that come into the city for that purpose, and I can't quote the numbers off the top of my head, but I will put a report together for that for you.
I'd be interested to see how it's been working, because there are just people here all the time that they can get into a home, but they can't afford the high-cost utility hookups. I want to make sure we've got a program that deals with that. We can help them get off being homeless. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question on this graphic, APD, AFD calls. Is this just data for Beans and Brother Francis or other agencies?
It's just the address, it's not the location. And I will say, one of the challenges that we have for this location is that there's other nearby places, 3rd and Carlick, 4th and Carlick, that have a high volume of calls. And really the campus is not able to control what happens outside of their area. So that's another struggle that we do have.
Anybody who calls who says,
All right, thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Gates.
Thanks. I had a question about the emergency code with the increase from 16 and 20 that establishes the planning protocols and how temporary cold weather shelters are designated. And right now it's released at our social service centers, churches, and other structures. I wondered if there's any changes we can make to help improve the readability capacity and how changes that are needed. And you don't need to tell us now. You can communicate suggestions later.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Cheney, did you have a follow-up?
Quickly, Nancy, the 24 they see on here for Anchorage Fire Department, that's not 24 people respond, it's 24 incidents. So how many people are involved with AFD on each response, do you know? How much equipment we're dealing with?
2 to 6.
2 to what?
2 to 6 people per response.
2 to 6. So when we see this, it says 24. That's not where it's the incident, not necessarily how many people went there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Trini. I think we are ready to move forward, Ms. Burke.
I think we've covered some of this, but I just want to remind the committee that as we move forward looking at the adult system, like with the other systems, there are subpopulations that we want to maintain focus, and these are some of the examples. And as we map out the system, we can also begin thinking about subpopulations and how we can focus them towards resources that are better suited to meet their needs. So we will maintain a focus over the next 2 years on these subpopulations as well. And that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Burke. I think for the purposes of time, we can go ahead and move on to our next presentation.
How is the subpopulation? First of all, this is actually amazing to me. I didn't get involved in this until about 7 years ago. And the progress that's been made is phenomenal. Don't tell the Republican Party this, but Nancy and Ethan have done an enormous job. And commitment that Ethan made to me because the original campaign to get homeless veterans off the street. Get homeless veterans off the street, and this was in response to 5 homeless veterans dying on the streets. I have provided you with a lot of information. Believe me, I didn't provide all of it. You have a complete copy of the proposal that's been submitted that was requested by the state of Alaska. In addition, I've handed out a number of other items. I just want to focus on a couple of them. First of all, and I know you're not used to this, I'm not asking for any money. Not from the municipality. Let me make a couple of points on some of the questions. We have a large group of veterans who come home or come to Alaska who live in the wild. We know this because they come to Anchorage in the summer for jobs. And we enable them to have jobs through our partners. They don't want to live in a hotel while they're in town. Most of them because they have a lot of very large dogs. So how do we accommodate that? I don't know. One of the things we're looking at in the village, how do we accommodate that? I've not met any women that are doing this. These are all guys. It's all about this big. But these are the classic Alaskans from way back. So we do have them. And they end up living in the woods and end up having problems with shelters or with the people that are not veterans and are not or condition of homeless. We're starting with a village idea. Now, interesting things happened in the last few years in looking at cabins. We have a growing number of community builders here that are looking at building small homes. And you know how much I love institutional insurance. Well, I'd rather have a whole bunch of different looking houses in the village than everybody having the same house. This is a veterans-owned community business in Palmer. Very simply, by the way, AgriVec has completed a review that we opposed, up to $75,000, but it was a very good review. And we learned a lot, and we found out a lot of information that we had not been able to find out. If you're interested in that, I can provide it on the internet. That doesn't mean AgriVec and we have are without disagreement. We have significant a variety of cost questions. As most of you know, I'm a project manager for residential development, so I do this for a living. I have an engineer that has been involved in residential development for well over 25 years. When he tells me it's going to cost X to do Y, that's what it costs. He very rarely is off the numbers. But when AgriVec did their numbers, they didn't have the capacity. And I'd also point out that AgriVec did not have any veterans on the review. Now, we provided them some veterans to help them through the review. Last time I'm up here, you asked me for letters of support. I have provided you with letters of support. But I need other letters. And I'm here because I need your support. When I go to Washington, D.C., we ask for the money that's available, which is available. I have to have an indication from the city of Anchorage, municipality of Anchorage, that they like this proposal. If we don't have that, we don't get considered. So it would be nice to have something from this committee, a formal resolution from the assembly, and God bless us, maybe you can have a letter. What do you think? I would forget to call the mayor, I've known him too long. I've also provided you a copy of the appendix. The appendix has lots of stuff. We have a 5-year grant strategy, which is provided professionally for others to develop. The village is a cooperative community of veterans. One of the things that Ethan and Nancy have done is got veterans off the street, but they don't want to live in Anchorage. It's one of the funny things we learned. When we sat down and interviewed homeless veterans, the first thing they said is, we don't want to live here. Where do you want to live? I don't want to live in one of those converted hotels. Well, where do you want to live? I don't want to live down on the 4th Avenue subculture. Where the hell do you want to live? I just love to have a cabin in the woods someplace. That's for the idea for the village came about. Now, we have looked at locations. Believe me, Health Trust was exceptionally effective in helping us trying to find land. We could not find land, but they have an inventory that met the requirements that we needed to do the services we need to provide. And then we got a call from the realtor who told us about some property in Clinton, and we looked at that property. The woman's been there since God created Alaska and is not interested in selling. She'll die. Her son lives in Phoenix, and maybe he'll call us. Then Clinton offered us some property adjacent, which we spent a great deal of time and money looking at. That is off the table because they wanted to do the rehab, which they should do. But there's no feelings at all. What we're talking about doing now is 185 acres at the turnoff at Highland off the Glen Highway, past the shooting range. You know, the shooting range doesn't bother us, but it's supposed to make it us, because they usually don't shoot at night. And when you know they're shooting, you know what they're doing, and they're not shooting at us. So it doesn't bother us. The 185 acres, there's a law passed, Lisa was involved in it, that allows the lease of DOD property for purposes consistent with military behavior. The State Military Academy is leased. the Alaska National Guard is on a lease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a property that the former head of real estate for the J House called J Bear didn't even know they owned. In fact, as a result of the work we've been doing, we've got all kinds of other properties they didn't even know they owned. So, we're talking about a lease of property to the foundation, to the state, through the Department of Military Affairs under contract to the foundation. That's how it works. It's that simple. Guess what that does? The price goes way down. Guess what else it does? It enables in-kind assistance from the United States Army, from the Corps of Engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Our estimates show at least $2 to $2.5 million of savings in road construction. So, pushing it down. The other thing it does is it integrates the guys and gals that live in the village into the Armed Forces YMCA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, one of the difficulties we have, which Nancy, I'd like you to help us look into, the Department of Corrections pulls a bus up at night and lets some people out the door over by the shelter. How many of those are veterans? Simple question. How many of those are veterans? No response. We don't count veterans. Of course they count veterans. We know they count veterans. We asked, formally and informally, why don't you let us know 30 days before they get out? We'll come and visit with them. If they don't want to talk to us, that's fine. If they want to talk to us and have us help them through that process, we may be able to help. So we need to get DOT off the butt to help us make these kinds of transitions, because it would solve some of the problems that happen when they drop folks off down at the shelter. I have provided you an action agenda. What has to happen now? I need letters of support from the community. The governor is ready to write a letter. The governor read every page and went through it line by line. He loves the idea. First thing he said is, how much does the municipality going to contribute? And I said, nothing. He said, why not? Because they don't need to. Oh. But he's very much involved in the project. I hope you take the time to read the formal proposal which you have, because one of the things that we've done is we didn't look at the symptoms of homelessness. We started out there, but that's not where we ended. And we add something else, the reduction in suicide. As you know, veterans kill themselves 22 to 25 a day in the United States. Alaska, again, highest number of veteran suicide of any state per capita. Why? What is happening? Why are these guys homeless? What's going on? So we got down into the root cause, down into the post-traumatic stress, down into the combat guilt, down into that stuff, which is not a lot of fun. But we began to learn about how to help these guys and a few women survive. So housing, one of the things we have now is we have guys in HUD-VASH properties in town, and we look forward to going and knocking on their door and saying, here's Bed Village, would you like to make this space available to somebody else? We start with the main building, because we have to have a kitchen. We just strongly advise those who are playing in the cabins. Okay. We have the kitchen feeds 100 people 3 times a day. I have letters of commitment for 150 jobs a year. You only take 100 people. Work, everybody we talk to, without exception, that deals with veterans, particularly combat veterans, say Work is the most effective therapy for homeless and recovering veterans. But HUD says I can't require work. That's about to change. We have some friends. I have a Vietnam friend in the White House. Very effective gentleman. That's about to change. We've moved away from transitional housing to permanent housing. But we are constantly inundated and get calls from the mayor's office of people who will come here, thinking they have a job, not this and not that, and suddenly they have no place to live, they run out of money, they have 3 kids, etc. We give them all the information that you guys have put together, but they really need a limited community of veterans. Let me explain a couple of these. Am I taking too much time?
We will need to wrap up in a couple of minutes because I do have questions and then another presentation.
Take a young veteran, 17 years old. He leaves a very abusive home and he goes and joins the army. Suddenly, he has a home. Suddenly, he has a family. He has a mission in his life. He has comrades. He leaves the army. What happens? He's 17 years old, all alone. I did not understand what I do now. The separation from service for many guys and gals can be enormously painful, physically painful. They're suddenly alone after they were in an enormously regimented, enormously directed, and enormously friendly community. One of the reasons for homelessness. Let me give you 2 stories and then I'll quit. These are both full, honest stories. A Vietnam medic on a team traveling around visiting villages. In the course of visiting the village, the medic meets a young girl, about 8 or 9 years old, a surviving child from a family. Everybody else was killed by the Kong. It's called the Viet Cong. She is shunned by the village because they're afraid of her. Over the months, a relationship builds between the medic and the Vietnam girl. And it's decided that he asks the company commander about the adoption of the girl to take her home. It's finally approved. The team goes out again, the medic goes out, and they hear the events going on in the village. They hear screaming. And they come up over, out of the jungle, and they see a young girl tied up on a pole with the skin being pulled off her back by the Viet Cong. Why? Because somebody found out that she was going to be adopted by an American. The American turns to the sniper and says, "Would you please?" And he shoots her in the head. That's combat heroes. Another story, a young man, Iraq, his job is to sit on a Bradley with a 30 caliber. He's the last gun into the gate for the base. Whenever it gets past this point, he's got to stop. Sits there, half asleep. Suddenly, shots are flying. People are screaming. He wakes up, looks out there. There's this cart coming down, going around the barrier, bad out of hell, running in, and he lays that 30 down and takes it out. They thought it was going to explode. They thought it was an explosive device. The guys get around pretty soon. It's clear that it's not explosive. He gets off the bag, he walks down, and looks in the car. And there's a man and a woman and 2 little girls in the back seat. Combat skills. You'll find a lot of times the base for post-traumatic stress, combat skills. We can fix that. We know how to fix it. And it happens in a setting like the village. The village is 12 minutes away from the VA. Communities are accepting it. The hard parts TOB, I would strongly advise why the White House has come from the top and not from the bottom. And so that's how it will work. We will not be doing anything for probably 6 to 8 months as we go through this process. Once the lease is done, then we'll be back to let you know what's going on. We will be working on pre-construction and prepping and the first building and the first 25 cabinets. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Rick. I know you and I talked about this when I first got on the assembly, and at that time I think Clutno was still the planned site, so it's obviously changed and evolved a lot since then. I'm a huge supporter of this, as I think most of my colleagues are as well. You already answered most of my questions with your presentation, so I guess it sounds like the one thing you didn't answer, although I think I know, is would you prefer a letter or a formal resolution? I think we could potentially do both, and if the time frame is you're not going to be able to have real movement in 6 to 8 months anyway, then we can do that.
No, that's how long it takes to go from the White House to DOD.
Okay, so what's the time frame in terms of?
I need a letter from this committee, I need a resolution from the assembly, and I need a letter from the mayor. Those are the 3 things I need.
All right. Well, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I think we can do that.
Yeah, we've done it in the past.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Would you prefer, Mr. Chairman? So I know, for example, for the MLP sale, that started out as a suggested resolution that came from the committee to the full assembly. So we could do it that way, or we could just introduce a resolution at the assembly and have a letter from here.
By the way, I forgot to mention one other thing. In 18 months, this facility is financially self-supporting.
Great. Of course, from my perspective, I think a resolution coming from the assembly would be better because you have all 11 members. We set policy, the mayor doesn't. And they may not understand at the federal level, but our city charter says the assembly sets policy. This is policy. Should come from 11 members of the assembly. So I'd encourage you to bring it forward and let us deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's thank you. I think that's a fair tactic. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. And as often the case, I'm in a position where I have to declare conflict. I always say this, I work for Connie, or not work for, I am a realtor under her brokerage, and Connie is related to Rick, and Rick will be the first to tell you she has nothing to do with the foundation, but he did say he's a real estate developer, project manager for a real estate developer. So in that sense, we operate under the same umbrella of a shop, and I don't feel like there's conflict. And if you look at the letters of support back in 2015, long before I was doing any work in real estate, I was already on the record.
In the letter, yes.
It's as the council president in Fairview, so it's in your packet where the letters are. But just for the record, it should be disclosed that I have that affiliation.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Trainee.
Rick, question for you. Do you have, your engineer look at utilities? Because you're going to put that many cabins in there. I want to know what type of utilities you're planning on.
One of the things
And
that
roads.
happened out of the Agnew bed process is we looked at natural gas, and we're adding natural gas. But a lot of it has to do with the negotiation with DOD. So there's electricity there, there's natural gas there. We can bring those in. We're not going to use additional sewer. We're going to use on-site water and sewer because of the new system that we can apply there. But we think we'll handle it.
Can the ground, have you had an engineer look at to see if the ground structure can take that intense use of taking the water out and putting it through a septic back in?
You know, I used to be the state director of water, Chief Alaska Hydrologic Survey, and one of my chief hydrologists and I snuck on base and looked at that, and we're pretty confident. I mean, we'll have to dig some holes, but we're pretty confident. The water flow there is pretty dramatic because of the way it comes off the hill.
My suggestion, Rick, is just that you have an engineer look at it.
Because we were so behind schedule.
Other thing is, you said that the range there wouldn't bother you. I've used the range before quite a few times. But they've got a lot of helicopters coming in to Fort Rich there. They fly right over that area. We thought about that impact on the
helicopter
war veterans.
Somebody who flew in
Sound of
helicopter
freedom.
has air rentals and other things. Housing is a wonderful thing to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. All right. So thank you, Mr. Davidge, again for coming forward, and we'll be in touch on how we proceed forward as a body. Thank you. So moving on to our last presentation on the CSS Medical Respite Program.
Before I dive into the healthcare partnership, and I'm very excited to talk to you about that today, I just wanted to briefly cover sort of what's been happening in Building Infrastructure, like in terms of our capital social services commitment to improving the shelter for the tissue that we serve for our guests. Since 2016, we have been increasing staffing, and we more than doubled staff at Brother Francis Shelter to address the growing severity of needs guests receive and to ensure safety for all staff and guests. I'm not sure if everyone knew that, but I wanted to let you know that we've committed to that and we've made that happen. Additionally, we've added private security. So we added private security at night because of the growing concerns in the parking lot following the closing of camps around the city. And this was also done with private funding that we fundraised from people in the community that are really concerned. And that is at a cost of $130,000 a year. We increased our hours to be open 24 hours a day. We did that 2 summers ago. As an ask, the Assembly asked us to do that and gave us some one-time funding to do that. And we did, and it's been a great way and an opportunity to serve the people that we serve better and to provide more resources to them. So we are staffed up and that people can come in and use our services. They can take a shower and do their laundry. They can get clothing, use our computers, and very importantly, connect with our case managers. And of course, that one-time funding is gone, and so we've taken that on as a cost for the Francis Shelter. So just to talk about, we've really invested a lot of funds and resources into Brother Francis Shelter to make it better. And you know, as a part of that, I'll just mention with the increasing utility rates, which I know have impacted all of us that live in Anchorage, right? But that combined with being open 24 hours a day, so providing more showers and more laundry. Our utility rates are really high. I mean, are a substantial portion of our budget. We are the largest and most comprehensive access point for coordinated entry in the city, and we've committed to entering as many people as possible in the system. And I think we are leading the effort in that in the city, Catholic Social Services. We've moved from a traditional service model to a trauma-informed care model. So this involves staff training and rewriting of rules and procedures. Trauma-informed care, it's really great to be going after Rick on this because trauma-informed care is an evidence-based practice that teaches service providers or organizations about triggers and vulnerabilities of trauma survivors, which everyone that we serve at the Francis Shelter are trauma survivors. And then it provides effective interventions. So that's something we've really committed to and that we've undertaken and we've done, although it's a work in progress always. And then we worked really closely with the municipality, with the AFT and APD, and now with the mobile intervention team. But we've tried to partner closely with them all along to create a more cohesive system. And we've greatly appreciated the focus that's been given to high utilizers and those with extreme challenges that are really beyond the need or beyond the ability of the shelter to serve. And then we continue to respond to concerns from various stakeholder groups. We are part of the community response system. We're conducting employment training for staff and we've moved a clinic schedule. I'm going to talk about the clinic, but we try to respond to people's problems when they bring it to us, try to work together with them. So one of the best examples that I can talk about that I think is such a strong demonstration of our work together and our commitment is the partnership with the hospitals. Now, you all have had the opportunity to hear a little bit about this partnership before, and so you know that it has involved all the hospitals in town, and the Tribal Health Consortium as well as South Central Foundation, Regional Providence, Neighborhood Health, and the municipality. And these partners came together because we all recognize problems. At the shelter, we recognize that there's many people that we're serving that have intense health issues, and they are not getting the care that they need. And hospitals are seeing that people that have needs related to their housing are clogging the systems that they have, and they don't know how to address that. So in response to that, we really started 3 interventions. And now it's been a year since those interventions. So I have data here for the first 10 months. We're going to be releasing the full year of data to our hospital partnership next week, and then we can talk about that at a greater length. But we don't have all the data quite yet. But this is 10 months, and it talks about the 3 programs. So it'll talk about our medical respite, our fully staffed caring clinic on campus inside of the residential shelter, and then our medical transportation. We're really excited about all 3 projects, and they really made a visible difference in our shelter, but most importantly in the lives of the people that we serve. So I'm going to let Lisa Calder talk a little bit about medical respite.
Thank you for having me. So medical respite is a 10-bed program that's physically on site at the shelter. What you have are individuals who are discharging from the hospital who fit our target population, who their discharge coordinators will coordinate with our staff on site in order to send a referral forward. So usually what the hospital will see is that they have someone who's 18 years or older, someone who is homeless, and that's going to be literally homeless, it's some of that definition confusion. This is someone who has no other place to go to recuperate, and being discharged to the street or shelter is inappropriate. So they are coming from either Providence, Regional, ANMC, South Central Foundation. They also have a willingness to engage with respite staff and our services, which includes case management, and able to live in a communal environment, and they're independently mobile. Because of the setup of the program, it's a social service program. We don't have nursing or medical staff for that program specifically. We're going to need that the individuals are not incontinent, not needing extreme medical services 24 hours a day. However, if they are in need of home health care, that piece can definitely follow with them to the shelter. So as a program, what we are providing on site is the ability to meet their needs to help them rest, recover, and then hopefully become housed. That is our goal. Our goal is 80% of what we call patient guests, the clients of medical respite, are going to be discharged into permanent stability. So we are offering intensive case management services on site. That's going to include a lot of coordination of the individual care provisions, supporting them while they're there, connecting them to medical appointments, starting applying for benefits, insurance, jobs, and housing. And then there is a case manager that will work with them after they are housed for up to 9 months. The goal of that period of time is going to be to support that individual to make sure that that housing is stable and permanent. So a lot of it is going to be working on their biggest barriers to stability and also transitioning them to community-based services as we wean them off of our to date, what you'll see on some of your graphs, well, when this report was made, is that we had 68 guests or patient guests come into medical respite. Normally, our rate from referral to admitted is about 45 to 50%. you could think of like the referral rate probably doubled. And we've had, at this time, we had 28 individuals be discharged into permanent stability. Now, we use a small pot of funding from Providence Hospital to rapidly house these individuals. So some are utilizing grief and limited financial assistance as well, so in a step-down process. It's averaging, at that point, about $2,800 or so of assistance if someone needed in order to launch them into permanent stability. But because it's greatly flexible, for example, one individual, she just wanted a washer and dryer. She had the ability to use her HUD batch voucher. So as a veteran, she was enabled to different benefits. She just wanted the ability to have the laundry in place. That's what we have for. So what we've seen with medical respite being a housing intervention, we've been able to remove individuals who otherwise would have probably returned to shelter and I would think have their health deteriorate even further. So you have in front of you demographical makeup, and then on the back, what we can also talk about is the caring clinic. So with South Central Foundation,
the respite program is, just to remind you, it's funded by the three hospitals. So those are community dollars coming in to pay for this resource. It helps them, it helps the guests there, and it helps our community. And we leverage those resources that go to Francis Shelter to make them go as far as we can.
No problem. So another facet of this intervention that Lisa mentioned was the clinic. So the caring clinic on site, it's now a full-time clinic, and it has a physician assistant and a registered nurse in it Monday through Friday. We started off at 9 a.m. and in response to EFD's concern about calls starting around 7, we bumped that open time to be 7 a.m. as well. So the clinic is from 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. And to be honest, we are rocking and rolling in there. Just yesterday, we had 20 people come through. But over the course of these 10 months, we had 1,247 visits. So that is a duplicated community, not the unique individuals in there. But what we are able to do out of the clinic is to provide urgent care. So they're doing a lot of bumps, bruises, rashes, cold, flu. They're able to connect individuals to their medications. So through South Central Foundation, they've actually connected guests who were lapsed in their HIV medications back on their meds. So that was a huge success for them. We're able to also triage a lot of the concerns on the campus as long as the person can get to the clinic. And then utilizing portions of the DFS budget, we can support clinic patients going on to EDs, going on to medical appointments and referrals, and to pick up their prescriptions and get taxed. So
and you'll see on your, I made an estimate, so just the clinical services. And again, those are completely covered. So South Central Foundation comes in, they provide those. They bill insurance if the people have insurance. There's no cost to any of us except through your taxes to make up with it. But let's say that the clinic prevented even 10% of the people it's seen from going to the emergency room in that time. That's 134 people. I found an average cost for ER visits that you'll see the site down below. That's a savings of $82,000. That's an estimate, and I believe probably a low one. So just to say, like, these are extraordinary. It's amazing.
Thank you, and I apologize, but because of timing, I'm going to have to cut this short. And I think I have a couple of questions, and then that'll be it for the committee meeting. So, Mr. Trainee.
Quick questions. What's your staff ratio now for Brother Francis?
Our staff ratio depends on the time of day. So at our busiest time of day, from 4 to midnight,
we are 1 to 50.
1 to 50? Okay. That's 4 to midnight?
Yes, that's 4 to midnight, and then all other times it's going to be that 1 to 100.
Now, Lisa, what hours are your bathroom available to people that walk up and need to use a restroom? What hours are your restrooms available to the public?
Yeah. So 7 a.m. until roughly 11 p.m.
PM. How many restrooms are you talking about?
How many toilets do we have on site? We have 11.
11, okay. Last question was private security. Who'd you go with? You still have the old Phoenix you had before, which was a problem, or have you gone to a new one?
That's a good, well, we've actually, Phoenix is actually our second. We had another company first, but we had ours, we changed, and we're at Phoenix. And
It's kind of like our SAP, we
Yes,
didn't change. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So we're, Phoenix, so we are working with the city and assessing our contract, but also, but we are still currently.
You still have Phoenix?
Yeah, and they're there 4 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Is it
to
a
help
super,
meet
super
that
quick
transition
question?
time in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a bewitching hour.
Maybe you already have an answer.
3 and 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Rose, super quick question.
3 quick questions. The medical respite, how much does that cost? The fully staffed caring clinic, how much does that cost? And the medical transportation, how much do we spend on that?
The budget for medical respite, which supports 3 full-time staff members, 2 case managers, 1 program manager, is $287,000. I don't know how much it costs South Central Foundation to operate the clinic, but we can get that to you.
Did you?
And then for 10, yes,
Transportation.
you have the grand
There's
total.
2 pieces, right, but you have these ground totals in this graph. So what I wanted to just point out in this graph is that you have the number of rides and you have the cost. The respite rides are a part of the hospital budget, which is provided by the hospital. The clinic rides, those are covered by Catholic Social Services and donors to us. So for just under $20,000, we estimate that we saved between a couple of $100,000. It's a pretty extraordinary number.
And then the caring clinic?
That's run by South Central Foundation, so I don't know the cost.
Could you get me that too? Could you get me those estimates too?
Yeah, we could try.
Thank you.
All
Mr.
right.
Chair, before you bang the gavel, just to note that we are still trying to schedule the joint committee meeting between the Homeless Committee and the Public Safety Committee on the ordinance regarding Section 880. So,
Yes. And with that, for everyone interested, the Public Safety Committee meeting is downstairs, first floor. Thank you.